Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the GameWeek 19 cheat sheet, and it's going to be a rather quick video, but if you haven't watched the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a video series in FPL where I cover all the price points and all the positions, looking at all the players that we could possibly look at for the sort of medium to long term in terms of the fixture runs that we have, and looking at underlying stats plus what managers have said, or any kind of tidbits that we've gotten from press conferences that will sort of inform us of what the landscape is like in FPL and what transfers to make. As far as this week, I really don't think that there are too many changes in terms of the actual cheat sheet itself from Game Week 18. So the changes that we have in the midfield position this week are an Andreas Fall. Ultimately, of course, after such a good fixture on paper has gone, and of course, Fulham did lose to Burnley 0-2. I just think that, of course, Andreas probably still deserves to drop just because you're really targeting him specifically to have maybe covered that blank for Game Week 18. And then also specifically looking ahead at, let's say, the midfield template, we will be, of course, having a lot more money soon within our team. So if, let's say, you do own someone like Andreas going forwards, yes, of course, he's a nice asset in the sense that if Willian, for example, continues to be out, he will be the penalty taker for Fulham. It just might still be the case that you can actually stretch your budget to players with actually slightly better underlying stats. And of course, Andreas is one of the few players, I suppose, even, let's say, close to Douglas Luiz, these players are more sort of set-piece creators, more players that you expect to do quite well on bonus when they actually get their assists. But if they don't get the assist, unlikely, for example, that they're, very dominant in terms of expected goals. So very different to some of the other midfielders that we have within FPL right now. As far as the actual changes in terms of Palmer and Douglas Luiz, I still think these are top tier options because the minutes for these players are very secure. I'm recording this video right now before Chelsea vs Wolves has been played. So I'm not sure, of course, if, let's say, Palmer or Sterling would have gotten a yellow card. That would, of course, change their, validity as picks, or, of course, just means that you bench them for one certain week in FPL. But it's not a huge issue, in my opinion, in terms of their value within the game. As far as, let's say, Hee-Chan and Tavernier, issue with Hee-Chan, in my opinion, simply is just because he's going to be leaving the game soon. So for the same reason why I haven't really given Kudush any rises recently, simply just because he's going to be a transfer out within 2 to 3 weeks' time for all of us as managers. And that's the issue with Hee-Chan. As far as Tavernier, I still think he's a good pick, but as you can see, obviously, there's going to be a lot of games where Bournemouth play where he's not dominant. The case, of course, is that still at that sort of price point, if you're looking for someone at that price point, he's still quite good. But as I said, we will be, for example, trying to spend as much money as possible in the future once Salah and Son are out of the game. As far as the 6.x players, no changes there. 7.x players, yeah, I mean, I have to probably make an apology, I suppose, to Bowen and address it to old Jared Bowen and owners. He's been a fantastic pick in FPL this season. I still probably wouldn't classify him as a green, to be honest, just looking ahead towards an Arsenal away fixture. But the reality, of course, is that Bowen has been tremendous. One thing I'll say, of course, is that when you look at the underlying stats that Bowen has had recently, it's actually quite incredible how well he's performed, because you can clearly see that. I mean, there are other players at different price points here who have very, very similar, for example, expected goals per minute that have not really reached the heights that Bowen has this season. He's been one of the key overperformers, and I can't really doubt it because right now, of course, even the West Ham attack itself looks rather good with that sort of front three right now of Paqueta, Kudush, and Bowen. So it really just depends on where you sit in terms of the money spent. I think, of course, as soon as Salah and Son are out of the game, we're probably going to be looking for players to actually put into our teams, and therefore Bowen will actually probably find his way into our FPL teams there and then. As far as, let's say, Grealish and Martinelli, no changes here. The reason why I still have Martinelli on the cheat sheet, even though he's been absolutely horrendous when it comes to FPL performances lately, is the simple fact that Kai Havertz will be suspended for the West Ham game. So I think if you're, let's say, a Martinelli owner and you're incredibly frustrated with him so far, I would give him the West Ham fixture, and after that, I would consider, let's say, taking Martinelli out of the team entirely, even though, of course, as I said, we're going to be entering a landscape of FPL where we have a lot of money to spend. It just seems to be the case that, of course, this Arsenal attack is still rather poor at times, right? And ultimately, Martinelli, Odegaard, and Saka, these are all players who have pretty poor underlying stats. Probably Saka still the absolute best, but that's also coloring into, let's say, the penalties that, let's say, Odegaard and Saka have. So Martinelli, we can single out as someone who has really bad underlying stats, but I think once you take away the penalties, for example, for both Saka and Odegaard, it is fair to say that they've been really poor. And maybe the question that a lot of people will be asking right now is why Saka deserves, still a top-tier spot within the cheat sheet. I still think that, given that Arsenal have good fixtures generally for the next 4 games, basically, I can't really see why Saka would drop in the cheat sheet. It's not like I'd for example, be looking to move Saka out of the game for someone like, I don't know, Douglas Luiz, for example, even though Douglas Luiz did quite well this week. So that's just the context, in my opinion. I think the midfield depth is actually a little bit overstated right now. Yes, of course, we have a lot of flexibility, but still, it's not such that I would actually be dropping Saka out of my FPL team. As far as, let's say, Odegaard, I've given a rise as well. It's just the case where, as I said, we will have more money to spend. Salah and Son will be out of the game. We're going to be looking for options to actually replace them with, and maybe Odegaard, Fernandes, Bowen, these sorts of types of players are going to be the ones that we actually replace Salah and Son with. But for now, obviously, Salah and Son are still, for example, the reigning kings really of the midfield, and no changes have really been made. As far as the forward position, this is an odd one because there's been no changes this week, and I made some changes last week, such as rising Calvert-Lewin, so nice to see, of course, that he was able to score. As far as other changes here, there's really nothing to make. I mean, I mentioned that Wilson and Isaac, I think just going into that sort of minefield there just isn't worth it for an FPL manager unless you were trying to free hit. As far as players like Darwin and Nkunku, it seems like Nkunku is actually set not to start versus Wolves. We'll see what happens, of course. As I said, I'm recording this video before Nkunku plays. Maybe Nkunku absolutely plays brilliantly, but as I said, the issue when you go into a player who's been coming back from a long-term injury is that clubs will always manage their fitness. So the upside is really just hoping that Nkunku performs, or overperforms really within a short space of time, as opposed to recognizing that Nkunku is a very, very good player, and he's going to be able to get a lot of good minutes. The reality is that clubs will manage those minutes, and Nkunku, unfortunately, will struggle in that point of view. As far as Jesus, Darwin, players like that, I mean, Darwin's probably set to actually start after coming off the bench versus Arsenal. Luis Diaz continues to play very poorly for Liverpool, unfortunately, and that, of course, just is a good position for Darwin owners. But generally speaking, I think, as I said at the outset of the video, Solanke probably is the king of the forward position right now. I think if I'd be spending funds in the future, even though Solanke technically has some pretty tough fixtures coming up, such as Tottenham away, Liverpool at home as well, ultimately, I think we're just going to be going back into Solanke very shortly, particularly, let's say, if you already missed the boat on Solanke and you're going to bring in, let's say, Erling Haaland on Game Week 20 or Game Week 19, I do think that, of course, the player who you own in this bracket here, let's say Jesus and Nkunku, Darwin, Wilson, Isaac, all these players are easy transfers out back to Solanke in an 8 attacking structure. So that's my opinion on Solanke. I think you can definitely own something like Solanke, Alvarez, Watkins for now. But of course, one of those players will have to go towards Haaland. And ultimately, it's just a case of whether we can actually get any Haaland news at all. As far as the defenders this week, not too many changes here as well. I've actually taken out a few defenders. And part of this is actually just the changing landscape of the Newcastle defense really being reflected here. And the key thing, of course, as we can see, is that Lascelles had an injury in his game. Livramento was benched, and that was expected. But Burn, of course, was also subbed off a little bit earlier. It just makes me think that because Livramento has played so well this season, that I'm struggling to believe that Burn and Livramento won't share minutes. Whereas with someone like Botman, if Lascelles is out, and ultimately if Lascelles, for example, is out even for a short term, and Schär is actually back fit, the reality, I think, is Lascelles would probably still find his way back into the bench. I'd be surprised if Botman, for example, was someone who would lose his spot back to Lascelles, if that makes any sense. Whereas I think Botman, for example, is the one to stand or to benefit the most, really, in this landscape here, now that Lascelles is injured, and he's probably just going to reclaim his starting spot in the team and probably continue to play really, really good minutes for Newcastle as he did in the past. So that's why I think Botman has been added into the cheat sheet. Livramento and Burn, unfortunately, have been taken off. I just think that when you're looking at your FPL team now, it is time to consolidate into players who start every single game. Unfortunately, of course, with a Tsimikas injury, he's been taken out of the cheat sheet. So it's a case of really when you look at a club like Newcastle, you can invest into a player like Botman or Trippier, obviously, whereas when you're looking at Liverpool, you actually do have to spend that much money for Virgil or Trent. And ultimately, I think Trent definitely reigns supreme still over Virgil, despite the huge sort of price gulf there. It's the reality that Salah and Son will leave the game and will have some money to spare. And I think Trent, of course, is one of the few players that deserves to be where we spend our cash. As far as, let's say, players like from Chelsea, for example, you're looking at Colwill, who's already been added to the cheat sheet previously, but Gusto as well has been added. My key issue here, of course, is that there is more possibilities, in my opinion, for Disasi to, let's say, take away minutes from Gusto, even though Reece James is out for a permanent time. And as far as Colwill, of course, there doesn't seem to be that much left back depth on the radar until, let's say, of course, someone like Chilwell comes back in, because we know as well that Cucurella is out injured. As far as, let's say, Everton, I've kept them here. Of course, other people will be looking at a team like West Ham, who've gotten 2 clean sheets in a row, and asking why I haven't added them here. It's just the case, of course, that they play Arsenal away. As far as, let's say, Zuma, of course, I think he maybe deserves a shot in the cheat sheet in the future, but not really, for example, an essential pick right now, so I haven't added him this week. As far as the 5.x position, I've just reflected that Zinchenko should rise. I also think that Walker should be appreciated in the sense that if you're looking for a defender transfer and you have no issues in your teams, let's say you have Trent, you have Trippier, you have players like that, I think obviously it makes sense to actually build up for that Sheffield United home game, which of course we like to target, and ultimately of course it didn't work out this time for people who actually invested in Aston Villa, but more often than not that will succeed. It is ultimately the case that Sheffield United still look like a horrible football team, and I don't think my opinions on them would really change after that one result versus Aston Villa. And so of course when you're looking at, let's say, Man City being, let's say, a good team to target, considering that they actually now finally have a decent fixture run ahead of them, I do think Walker of course just needs to be shown that sort of appreciation, given that he's actually played so many minutes for them this season, and that's a radical change in terms of our understanding of Man City defender minutes. As far as, let's say, Duncan Estupiñán, two, for example, differential options here. Looking ahead to, for example, a somewhat decent run for Brighton. The issue, of course, with Estupiñán is that I think his minutes once again will be managed. So very much like the discussion that I sort of expounded upon with Nkunku, you sort of have to be looking at that as well with the situation here with Estupiñán. I think it's very clear that he'll probably play managed minutes, which is maybe, unideal. Whereas, let's say with Dunk, of course, the attacking upside isn't the same compared to, let's say, Estupiñán, and of course the defending from Brighton isn't particularly great either. As far as Shaw, he falls simply because United, I think, have been a horrible football team. The injuries obviously have ravaged them as well. I mean, look at the backline they put out versus West Ham, and I mean even some of the mistakes as well, to, for example, leading to the Kudus goal. It is a bit shocking, and nothing really to say on United other than they're very firmly playing like a bottom half team, and we just have to treat them like such. As far as the goalkeepers for this week, no changes here other than just Petkovic being added. I think, of course, he's a bit of a risk because the issue with the Sanchez situation is it seems like he has a sort of knee injury, and it's very, very reminiscent of the Botman situation where we were getting these quotes every week from Eddie Howe saying he could be close to coming back into the team or he could be getting surgery. And those are the quotes right now that we're getting from Pochettino. I don't think the situation has changed too much with Sanchez. I do think Sanchez generally is a good pick if he's fit. But the issue, of course, is it seems like there is ever the chance that Sanchez could be out of FPL for a while. And the only issue with Petkovic that I see is that, unfortunately, he's not priced at 4.0 or 3.9 at that sort of price point. So at 4.5, you're sort of taking a punt onto a player who, at similar price points to players like Pickford and Raya and Dubravka, or even Areola, I just don't think it's worth that risk. But of course, some people will be happy to take it because Chelsea ultimately still have a very good fixture swing. And if you can, let's say, squeeze out the maximum amount of points from a Chelsea defender now, given that, for example, players like Colwill or Thiago Silva or Gusto aren't absolutely nailed either, it could make sense. As far as the, for example, expensive goalkeepers, no changes there. And that's the cheat sheet for Game Week 19. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to like and subscribe, or even comment your thoughts in terms of players that I might have missed. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful game week ahead and enjoy your December time.